Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this Wednesday afternoon session of the WBP Conference. My name, for those of you that don't know me, is Ant Rogers, and I'm the Biodiversity Implementation Officer for the Pembrokeshire Nature Partnership, and we work across the county of Pembrokeshire to coordinate and promote action to address the nature emergency and promote resilience of ecosystems with all the stakeholders in our county. It's my great pleasure to facilitate this afternoon's session, which is on meeting human needs, and we'll crack on shortly. Before we do that, just a little bit of housekeeping. You're probably all familiar with this by now, but we'll go through it anyway. So you're all going to have your cameras off and be muted throughout the presentations. So if you have any questions, you'd like to start some chats, then just use the chat function, and we'll try and pick that up if there's time at the end of each individual slot. Further details on all the presentations and the profiles of the speakers are all available on the Hoover page. So if you register for these sessions, you'll have access to those, and I'd encourage you to do that. And the sessions are being recorded, so shortly after they finish, they will be available on the WBP website if you want to go back and refer to anything. So without further ado, we'll hand over to the one and only Louise Tambini from Keep Wales Tidy for the first session, which is on urban communities. Louise.
Thanks, Ad. Delighted to be here. Thanks for the invitation. And hopefully you can see that. Can you see the slide? Can someone give me a nod?
All good.
All good. Okay, great. So I'm here to talk about local places for nature, and particularly focusing on the work we've been doing in urban communities. Sorry, just 1 second. The programme has a number of elements. I'm here, I work for Keep Wales Tidy. I'm here to talk about the work that Keep Wales Tidy does. Some colleagues that are following me will be talking about other elements of local places for nature, including the local nature partnerships. And one thing all of the various elements of the programme have in common is they must focus in areas that have little or no access to nature, and with a particular focus in urban areas, which is why I'm talking to you today. So the Keep Wales Tidy packages are predetermined, prepaid packages that people apply for. We've set them up so they are as easy as possible for people to apply for, particularly those communities who don't have experience of applying for grants. There are a number of choices, and the packs include everything that a community would need to improve their local environment. That's the tools, materials, trees, plants, and critically, Keep Wales Tidy offers a time to help them to install their new biodiversity or food growing garden. Keep Wales Tidy will help anybody to apply for these packages so that by the time the application gets to the grant panel, we're fairly confident that they will go through the panel because we've helped to get over any barriers that they might have in the application process. And a key thing to talk about is that the packages we have are all designed to go on man-made surfaces, so they really are designed for urban locations. We have two types of packages available. The very small starter packages, they literally do exactly what it says on the tin. They're really for small areas and for people with no experience. That means they're not daunting, they're very easy to install, they're very easy to maintain, and they're very popular with applicants who've got very small urban spaces, places like sheltered accommodation, playgrounds with just grey yards, courtyards, very small locations. But as you can see, they can make a huge difference to a very small space, and really they're a great way for communities to get involved with nature and get the confidence that they can put their garden in place and look at a wonderful transformation it would make. We then have much larger development packages. These include lots of lovely treats like raised beds, sheds, greenhouses, lots of tools, loads of plants, all native. They are much bigger, so applicants do have to be constituted, and the installation takes place over a number of weeks or even months, with Keep Wales Tidy staff on site all the time to help the volunteers to install all various elements of the gardens. In terms of the impact, people might ask, oh, well, they're very, very small packages. They're not huge meadow projects. They are very small, but I think what's important to note is that we've been running this programme for 3 years now, so you start to see how the packages can link up and start to create perhaps some wildlife corridors. The map you can see there is just a part of Cardiff. So over the 3 years, we have installed 800 gardens across Wales, and you can see now that over the years, there's lots of packages being installed in quite close areas. So we can start to see that it can start having that much bigger impact. I said we were talking about urban areas today, so I'm going to give you some examples. You can see from the slides, these are not sort of the images you might have seen in the rest of the conference. They really are very, very urban locations. And the programme is really trying to help people who are furthest from nature and who are perhaps the more disadvantaged members of society. So there's just 2 examples here, which are both from Swansea, working with very vulnerable members of society. So crisis and Hillgorse residents. The amount of green space that these communities have is very, very small, but by applying to us for starters and development packages, you can see it makes a huge difference to those residents that it is aimed at. Another lovely example is Green Squirrel in Splot in Cardiff, a hugely deprived area. The group has had some fantastic ambition, and we've been really happy to be able to help with part of that. They've got a fabulous space. It's become this huge community resource with little shops, all sorts of things, big SUDS programs. So we were able to help them with one of our development packages and really focus on the wildlife in the area. It's brought together so many people. When they launched, I think 500 attendees turned up to that event. We're not claiming all the credit for Green Squirrel in Splot, but we're really happy that we've been able to help with the biodiversity element, and the transformation in a very, very green space really is quite remarkable. I would recommend you go down to have a look if you ever get the chance. As I said earlier, the programme really is aimed at the most vulnerable members of society. So the packages are designed to, as I said, to really help people to get involved. So we've done installed lots of packages with veterans, refugees, women's refuges. They're not publicised on our maps for obvious reasons, but they really can help those people to feel close to nature and to learn the new skills, learn about biodiversity, and work with trained staff to be able to improve where they live. We've been working quite closely as well with larger organisations, so fire service, and the gardens being installed there have really been helping well-being of the firefighters. A lot of the spaces are urban. There's some, with just tarmac outside, and they've now got these fabulous gardens. It gives them the opportunity to work with local schools, bring people into the site, and really, as it says in the quote there from the station manager, really help firefighters to deal with emotions post-traumatic incidents. So the gardens have become these real places of refuge and well-being, where firefighters can talk to each other about what they've gone through. So nature, the benefits of nature are vast. We worked a lot with social landlords as well. Again, a lot of very built up urban areas. Quite often minimal biodiversity on site. Residents are very disadvantaged. And so the starter packages and the developments are a really great way to start conversations with the RSLs and their estate teams and how they can improve mowing, for example, so they can start to act as a catalyst to other biodiversity activities. I'm not going to go through this slide, but if you get the slides afterwards, have a look at that little link. Paul is one of the residents from United Welsh, and the transformation for him personally and all of his neighbours has been remarkable. So socially, these sorts of activities are hugely important to residents as well. We wanted to talk a bit about how the little packages act as a catalyst. So there's a couple of examples now. Rogier in Monmouthshire, yes, it is rural. However, it is in the 10 to 20% most deprived for physical environment in Wales. They started off with one of the small starter packages, but very quickly progressed to one of the bigger wildlife development packs. And since then, they've gone on to bigger and better things. As it says there, they've planted an orchard, they've changed their mowing regime, they've done bug hotels. And what we're really delighted to see is how the starter package really was the catalyst for all of this work. It got them interested, it gave them the confidence, it put them in touch with the partners, so the LNP and the wildlife trusts, and really brings all of those partners together to be able to make much, much bigger transformations. Other sites have done the same, started off with a starter pack or development pack, and then really moved on to be able to do other improvements. So looking at ways that they can water their garden sustainably, creating new picnic areas, gardens for children. Some have even gone on and appointed their own biodiversity officers. So just trying to show that whilst the packages are small, the impact can be huge once they're all installed. And the contacts that are made really with the Keep Wales Tidy expert staff, the Wildlife Trust, social farms and gardens, and obviously the local nature partnerships, bringing all that together has been really, really beneficial. And what I would like to say is that we have given out lots of packages this year already, but we have a number left. So this is a plea really for anybody to help us promote the packages. We would like to get rid of them, if you like, in the next few weeks. So please promote if you can. And all the details for contact are on that slide. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Louise. That's fantastic. Watching the chat here, and I'm not quite sure if I'm in the right chat one at the moment, but there don't seem to be any questions at the moment. Have I missed anything at all? No? Okay. I mean, certainly, we've been working on this together, Louise, as you know, and I'm really interested in some of the stuff that you were showing there. Do you have any more examples of progressions? I know that this is part of a nice big joined up programme of government through the Keep Wales Tidy packages through to big projects with the HLF. Have you got any examples of people that have come through from a starter package and ended up doing something big?
Well, I wish I'd had a look at my notes before I joined.
Sorry.
Yes, we've got lots. We record in all of our documents, we record groups that have gone from starters to developments. That's easy for us because obviously we're managing all of it. What we started to do with the lottery now, working with Chris in the lottery, is asking him every quarter for a list of anyone who's come from a Build Places for Nature package. So there are some examples. I'm sorry, top of my head, I don't know names, but there are some that have gone on to lottery, and we're talking to one of the fire stations right now about doing exactly that. Where they've done their garden and want to do much, much more. So it will take a bit of time. People need to build their confidence. And obviously applying for a grant, some of the more disadvantaged organisations perhaps haven't got that confidence or the skills to be able to manage the money and do the procurement and the auditing that perhaps managing a grant needs sometimes. So that's why I think the packages are very exciting and of interest, because it takes away some of that administration that perhaps isn't the main focus of those organisations.
Okay, seem to have a hand up there. I can't quite see whose it is at the moment.
It was me, Ant.
Joanna, there we are. Great. Come in then.
from Keep Wales Tidy as well, just to help Louise out on that question, really. Yeah, we've had quite a few organisations that have gone on to progress to further things. One of the examples was a place up in Anglesey, an allotment society who also have a community allotment, and they secured HLF grant funding to further develop their site, and they basically created a wildlife area by digging out a large lake, planting trees and shrubs, that kind of thing, and also then a 200-metre all-access boardwalk so that people could literally go into the site, walk around, find out what was going on and that sort of thing. So that's one example of how you know, some of those packages have progressed to bigger and better things.
Yeah, and what we're doing this year for our end of year report is having that catalyst section in the, you know, in the document. So whilst we've got some examples of biodiversity, groups go on to do other things as well, like employ apprentices, for example, energy projects. So it can act as a catalyst for a huge variety of things, which is really exciting to see.
Yeah, no, as I say, I mean, from where I sit in a nature partnership, obviously we do some of the local places for nature stuff directly with the public estate stuff, and it's worked really well with, you know, sometimes people come to me as a nature partnership, but they're actually not quite in a place where they can necessarily handle money, so I can send them to Keep Wales Tidy and they get a package, and vice versa. People have had a package, want to do something bigger and maybe come to me or the HLF. So it's a really lovely joined up programme of government there that seems to be working quite well. It also it makes me think as well, you use the example of the fire service and some of the kind of decompressing after incidents and such like, and there's some lovely well-being stories in there, aren't there? Will you be capturing those in some kind of report, because we all end up having to try and you know, evidence the well-being benefits of the stuff that we're doing, and it's all grist to the mill, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. We capture stories. We're doing more and more videos where people are actually telling us their story, which is very moving, I've got to say. And we've just got a new survey together to go out to all the applicants that have finished their projects to ask them exactly that, some of those sort of softer outcomes. So we're just going to start doing that now in the next few weeks. So that'll be gathered for this year, yeah.
Okay, are there any further questions from anybody?
There's a couple of things in the chat, Ant.
You know what, I think I'm looking at the wrong bit of chat in that case. Where are you finding that?
I don't know, just in the chat section.
Okay.
Well, I can read them out if you like. So
if you wouldn't mind, yeah, I haven't got that here for some reason.
Okay, so Richard Whitehead commented, "I'm always really moved by the stories that have been told as a result of the packages being installed. It's always about the people and the heart of the sustainability of any nature restoration." And I think that's something that comes across really clearly with local places for nature is that people are at the heart, and if we don't engage those people in nature, then, you know, just the improvements don't happen. And I think, you know, so often as well, we have people who just know nothing about nature at all. You know, like, you know, on occasions we've said, okay, so you'll receive some plug plants, for example, and it's like, oh, what's a plug plant? And, you know, and it is really, really basic, you know, people with very little knowledge at all that we're dealing with.
Yeah, brilliant. I've actually managed to find the right chat now, so thanks for that.
Okay.
Brilliant. So yeah, we've got Kathleen Carroll, who runs the Action Plan for Pollinators Task Force at Welsh Government, commenting that some of them are coming forward to become Bee Friendly accredited. So once again, a really nice bleed across from one programme to the next, and it's almost like it's all joined up, isn't it? That's lovely. It? Yeah, great. So we've also got a question here from Roger BJ. Have you got any planning obstacles? Have you come across any kind of planning obstacles in delivering this stuff?
Yeah, we have a number of obstacles, as you can imagine. Whilst we make it as easy for applicants to apply, it does mean the Keep Wales Tidy has all the headaches of making sure permissions are in place, etc., etc. We do have some planning obstacles. I mean, we've got to say that the vast majority of the planning departments have been brilliant, and local authorities are obviously, it's really helpful having the LMPs as part of the programme, because they can open some doors for us, perhaps. But yeah, nothing we haven't been able to overcome, with the exception of perhaps one or two little sites too close to highways. But largely, yeah, we've managed to resolve most of the issues.
Would I be right in saying that a lot of the issues that you have faced have been more to do with just making sure people have actually got owner permission to do the work and to maintain it and such like as well?
Yeah, so there's no part, the build doesn't involve any planning permission. There's nothing, you know, over a certain height or anything like that that would need specific planning permission, and it is really just landowner permissions that we've struggled with on a few occasions.
Brilliant. There's one more question here from Richard Whitehead, just asking if you've got any further innovations on your ideas board.
Further innovations on my ideas board?
Richard, I think you can probably unmute yourself there. Go on.
No, I was just intrigued and interested. Obviously, this year you were had a lot of success with the orchards package. We're looking to expand that even this year. Are there any other things you've got that you thought, do you know what, we can do more than this, and what's the next innovation? Or do you think we've got enough on our plate as it is?
What we do, Richard, is we obviously listen to everything that applicants are telling us. So if there's a particular blockage, for example, people aren't applying because of X, Y, or Z, we will look at that. We talk to all the partners and the staff to look at what we think we could do in the future. There are some ideas around. I don't want to give you too much away yet. But yeah, we're always looking to improve, and whether that's with suppliers or what's included in the packages or the type of package. Now, this year we changed all of the package so that they could be installed on urban areas regardless of whether there was any grass on the site, because we found that was a barrier, and we really do want to be focusing more in those urban locations. So yeah, we're always changing. We're always up for suggestions for improvement as well. So that, you're exactly right. The orchards came from people asking us about orchards, and we didn't want to compete with other orchard programs that are out there. So we specifically designed a very small orchard, and yeah, it has been really successful. So we will do the same exercise now this year as well, and hopefully if we can have conversations about the future, who knows what exciting new ideas we can come up with.
Fantastic stuff. Any more questions from the floor? Just pop them in the chat if there are. No? Is it maybe just worth, for those people who are on the call that maybe are from slightly more rural backgrounds, just talking for a second about, whilst it's aimed at where people live, work and access services, it's kind of relative to where you live, isn't it? So, if you live in a rural county, that's not necessarily a no. Can you talk about that for a minute, Louise?
Yeah, we do want to allocate package across every county in Wales. So yeah, it is relative. So for example, if we were looking at Pembrokeshire, we would try to focus in the places that have got the most people in Pembrokeshire or are the most deprived, for access to services or whatever on the deprivation index. But also the programme is aimed at priority is given to people with disabilities and from Black, Asian, minority ethnic backgrounds. So if there were particular organisations in rural areas that were helping those participants, then they would be given priority. And similarly, food growing it's more open. It can be in anywhere really, and doesn't have to be in the urban deprived locations. So there is opportunity across Wales. So please, if anyone's interested, just contact the nature team and we can, see and check the eligibility for you.
Am I right in thinking that you'd like to at least get one in every town and community council as well? So if there's a town or community council that hasn't had anything yet to come forward?
We don't have that many available because I think there's 750 odd town and community councils. I mean, over the past 3 years, to be honest, we probably have allocated a lot to most of them. But yeah, definitely come forward, particularly if you're urban, or as I said, you're working with those priority participants. Please come forward. We've supported an awful lot of town and community councils across the board. I think even one of them had an orchard last week. So yeah, absolutely. Please come and have a chat to us if you've got any interest in these packages. And
to be clear, when we talk about areas of deprivation, people have only got to kind of tick one of the deprivation indexes on the WIMD thing. So, for example, if you're rural, that often is access to services that you're deprived with, as opposed to access to green space, maybe. Yeah, and I think the thing is with rural areas in particular, people might think, oh, well, there's so much green space, but is it accessible green space? Is it agricultural land people can't go and use, or is it space that they can access? So the panel is very good. Ant sits on the panel. He knows this intimately. It's not black and white. There are shades of grey in the criteria, because we are really trying to support those people who need the packages the most. Okay. Well, we're slightly ahead of time. We've got a few spare minutes. I don't see any more questions in the chat bar there. So I think you've obviously done such a great job of answering everything, and in your original presentation, Louise, that there's no further questions. So we'll maybe take this opportunity in that case to grab a couple of minutes that may become useful later. You never know. So thanks very much to Louise. Thank you very much for that. And without further ado, then we will start to move on to the next presentation just a couple of minutes early. If any of you are just joining the sessions, then you may have just tuned in for the next one. We will be talking about local places for nature. And I'll be introducing first of all the programme manager from Welsh Government, who's Richard Whitehead. If you have just joined, just to remind you then that you can ask questions in the chat bar in this meeting, and if there's time at the end of the presentation, we will get around to tackling some of those. If you want more details about the presentations or the speakers' biographies, then they're available on the Hoover platform, so just register for the session and that's available to you. And shortly after the session finishes, then the recording will be available on the WBP website if you want to refer back to it. Do feel free to exchange email addresses and start a chat and a conversation as we go. I've got a hand up before I hand over from Rachel Carter. I don't know if you're able to unmute yourself. If not, you're going to have to pop it in the chat, Rachel. I think that's the obligatory 5-second.
Your microphone's on now, Rachel.
Oh, there we are. You there, Rachel? I think we might be able to
switch your microphone on, Rachel.
Okay, doesn't seem like we've got any sound there. Are you unmuted, Rachel? Okay, perhaps if you can pop your question in the chat, then Rachel, we'll come around to that shortly. So without further ado, in that case, then I'd like to introduce you to the next speaker, talking about local places for nature, and it's Richard Whitehead from Welsh Government. Over to you, Richard.
Good afternoon, croeso. This next session kind of links really quite nicely in with what Louise has been talking about, in that we have another half an hour now to carry on talking about the Local Places for Nature programme and some of the other things that it is doing. Now, one thing I have a problem with here at the moment is actually seeing my slide set. I'm hoping everyone else can see it. It's going to make me talking about it very difficult, but I'll give it a go. Yeah, people can see it, fine. So the Local Places for Nature programme itself has been set up and established since 2020, and it's been put in place by Welsh Government, by the First Minister and Ministers themselves, to address small or effective implementation of nature on people's doorsteps. The programme looks to work with local communities and local authorities more closely and utilise them as facilitators and enactors to some of these local places for nature. There are a number of programmes, number of schemes within the programme that it operates, and you have heard quite eloquently from Louise about one of them, and that's the Community Packages scheme. That is a scheme managed by Keep Wells Tidy. We also fund an open access grant scheme as well by that's operated through National Lottery Heritage Fund, and that operates much bigger grant schemes, much bigger grants that operate 10 to 30, 40, 50,000 pound projects that look at everything from sort of sensory gardens to wildlife areas within local towns and community councils. We also fund a One Voice Wales coordinator, who Rachel, who we were in mute earlier, but she does a brilliant job of liaising with these town and community councils across Wales and looks to get them on the ladder at any of the points to invest in their time and efforts, and some of the Local Places for Nature grant funding to green spaces and green infrastructure within their towns and councils. We also have a Breaking Barriers scheme, which is also operated through the National Lottery Heritage Fund, which looks to work with underrepresented communities from the Black and ethnic minorities, Gypsy and Romano and traveller communities, to engage with them more effectively, to break down some of the barriers that stop them from approaching Welsh Government or other sources for grant funding. And that's in its second year now, and that's been really well received and quite innovative in its approach, and works with these communities brilliantly. And that finally leads me on to the other stream which we'll be talking about today, and that is the local nature partnerships, of which there are 25 across Wales, running in each of the local authorities and the national park authorities, and it's those that operate as a as the conduit for the financial management and the liaison, but the whole of the scheme itself is operated and scheme managed by WCBA. I have to apologise because I've had no notes to do that because I can't see any of the slides. I'm hoping that you can see the slides yourselves. But what I'd like to do now is to pass you on to a number of the local nature partnership coordinators, one of which is V, and so she'll be up next to talk about one of the aspects that the LNPs have been incredibly successful over the last year to 18 months in delivering, and that's the changing of mowing practices and improving nature-based amenity grasslands and verges for the benefit of us all. So if I can pass you across to V next, hopefully she'll be more effective in her presentation because she might have some more to see. Are you there, V?
Oh, she's just saying she's muted. I can see her in the chat. I will look for her.
Okay, and I'm having trouble stopping presenting as well, which is always helpful, isn't it?
Okay, apologies, Veronica. You were taken off the presenter list for some reason. You should be able to unmute and share your screen now.
Here I am. Right, bear with me a minute.
Richard, can you stop sharing your screen?
Yeah, we can see you all now, Veronica.
Great. Okay. I can't see anybody now, so I'm just talking to my blank screen. I'll carry on through. So yeah, I'm Veronica Branovic. Most people know me as V, and I'm the Local Places for Nature coordinator for Blaenau Gwent and Torfaen. So we have used quite a chunk of the Local Places for Nature funding for changes to the grass cutting regime, particularly in urban areas like parks and verges. So I've just got, we obviously started that in 2020, just before all the lockdowns came in. I started the job literally a week before the first lockdown in March 2020. But that actually did give us a bit of a chance to review grass cutting because none of it happened until May. You've probably all heard of No Mow May, but we actually do No Mow Summer, particularly in Torfaen. And that just means that areas are not cut between April and September. And then in September, we cut and collect all the arisings. So that's currently going on. we've extended that into October, just depending on weather really. As you can see in the example there, we cut visibility strips and then alongside footpaths and edges, so that actually looks like it is being managed rather than just abandoned, which is a bit of an issue sometimes. And then obviously, why do we do that? To increase wildflowers, but it also reduces the fertility and reduces things like rank grasses and docks and thistles, and just makes the wildflowers more competitive really. So just a few examples. So these are sites that have just been left over the summer for the last couple of years. The one on the left, I'm particularly pleased with, because when we started, there were no wildflowers in there at all. And we weren't really sure if anything would happen with that. But you can see there are some flowers coming into that. The other one was seeded about 10 years ago, so you can see there are still some species in there left over from that, but that is really, really diverse, and it's just outside a Texaco garage, so it's very visible and lots of people see it and comment on it actually. So another couple of examples of the management we might do. That on the left again, there's just an area of the longer grass, but a very wide path cut through that park for accessibility. And then the other photograph, just even if you raise the kind of blades on the cutting machines and just leave the grass to grow a few more inches or cut it less regularly, you can see the kind of diversity of species that's already in that grass there in a play area, but it's still obviously usable ground. So some of the benefits that we found with changing the grass cutting regimes, obviously reduces the impacts of flooding. The longer grass areas absorb more rainwater than the very dry ground that we've had this summer. Obviously there are well-being impacts to leaving areas longer and having more wildlife in them. Conversely, obviously helps with flooding, but also reduces the impacts of drought. There's some research that shows that the wildflower areas actually store more carbon than tree planting. And then obviously there's increased biodiversity, which helps towards Section 6 duty for local authorities. So I'll just give you a very brief timeline of what we've done in the last couple of years. Obviously, I've mentioned the external funding. So that, as I mentioned, COVID delayed grass cutting for a couple of months. And when the council announced that they would be restarting grass cutting, there was a little bit of an outcry, and people said, oh no, there's lots of wildflowers that are growing on the verges and lots of insects. They've seen butterflies and bees there. So the council agreed to review some of the sites and leave some of them in the summer. That gave us a chance to work with the operational staff to identify some sites that we could leave. There was a lot of identifying barriers. There were quite a few barriers to implementing the changes. People had been cutting the grass the same way for decades, so it's quite a change for a lot of staff. But we did involve them in, as you can see in one of these pictures here, we involved them in choosing new machinery which would help to do the cut and collect. We gave them information cards to hand out to the public so that they weren't bombarded all the time with negative comments. We put signage into majority of sites as well, and then held seminars to give elected members more information, so if they had inquiries about the approach, they could answer those inquiries. That's the idea anyway. We also had surveys carried out on a number of sites to establish baseline information, so that we could monitor any improvements to biodiversity. So just from those initial surveys, we found that a few sites were already really good quality and proposed to be local wildlife sites. So that was really interesting. So it's just the example of the information card on the left. So there's a little business card sized card to give out to members of the public. And then that's the signs that we've developed for each of the sites. And it's got a QR code which links to web pages with more information if anybody wants to find out any more. We then obviously did the first trial of cut and collect and seemed to go well. All the sites were done, so we had 31 sites there. And then we did try yellow rattle seeding, which didn't really take that well in majority of sites, so we'll probably have to try that again. You can see on the left there we had some kind of volunteer raking days, and whereas Blaenau Gwent Council came across just to see how we were doing things so that they could start doing that in Blaenau Gwent as well. But it was difficult to get much community engagement just because of lockdowns, really. But we did manage to get some volunteer engagement in monitoring the sites. We did more surveys then of more sites in 2021, and we've then piloted some areas in different parks. We're lucky in Torfaen to have Pontypool Park, which is a huge park, and so some of the areas that are kind of away from the main, the main areas have been left as wildflower meadows, and we're monitoring those. So as of 2022, we now have 150 sites in the scheme of all different sizes, some from just little verges, and some are kind of over about 5 hectares. So lots of different sizes. We also had a report done. We updated all of our maps for the operational staff, the grassland maintenance maps, and then technical ecology did a report on the kind of maximum potential for changes to grass cutting across the whole of Torfaen. So we now have that document and that plan for how much we could actually do if resources were unlimited. So it's unlikely, obviously, we'd be able to do all of it, but yeah, it gives us something to work towards. And obviously that's looking at biodiversity priorities, whether it's near existing bee lines, are they already near protected sites? And it also considered the survey results that we had done previously. So our next steps, we'll be doing another review workshop with operational staff soon. We haven't done that yet, actually, so that's a bit behind. And then we'll be developing clusters of sites. So where we've already had, where we've already started and been successful, we'll then identify clusters of sites around those to expand into. And then, of course, more botanical and invertebrate surveys in 2023, funding pending, obviously. And then there's just an example of one of the graphs that was in the report from technical ecology that shows what we're currently doing and where all the potential is. So you can see the green bars is where there's most potential and where we will need to focus next year and probably the year after. So there's lots of potential. I think that's my last slide. So I'll attempt to stop sharing. There, does that work?
Yeah, you can see you back again now.
Great, that's great. So I think, yeah, next speaker is Lucy, who's going to talk about what they've done in Newport.
Hi everyone, thanks Bea. Hopefully everybody can see the presentation. If somebody can just give me a yes or no, that would be great.
Yes.
Lovely, I think so. So I'm Lucy Arnold Matthews. I'm the Biodiversity Officer and Local Nature Partnership Coordinator for Newport, and I'm here today with my colleague Oliver Jenkins-Boubier. So for Newport, the Local Places for Nature grant enabled us to take a multi-year approach to changing our mowing regimes across the whole of the authority area, increasing and enhancing the biodiversity of different grasslands that we maintain across Newport. Before making the necessary changes, it was important for us that we got to know how our grounds teams worked so that we were able to understand the challenges that making changes would bring. Working together with them to find a balance of how to incorporate new grass cutting practices with the same number of staff, so that would hopefully also enable us to increase our capacity and manage more sites of biodiversity in the future. We also found that working with partner organisations and projects and campaigns such as Bug Life, Nature Isn't Neat, No Mow May and It's For Them helps to really reinforce the message not only for the wider community but also within our own organisations. The positive relationships that we formed with other departments and partner organisations helped us to gain wider buy-in from senior management and elected members, showing that there was confidence in the new approach that we were taking. It wasn't all plain sailing, and I think it is fair to say that we had to be bold with some of our decisions and not be so reactive and fall back to the old ways when the going got tough. So in year one, we selected pilot sites, which gave us the opportunity to trial different locations and figure out what resources we needed to secure the changes for the future. We bought a small tractor-mounted cut and collect mower, and having these pilot sites gave us the chance to make mistakes on a smaller scale and learn from them before we started to look at some of our bigger sites and roll it out more widely. So you can see in the slide here, we chose 3 locations and worked with 3 communities that had already shown an interest in having some leave to grow sites within the areas. So we've got an example there of a roadside verge, we've got an example of a meadowland, and again on the right there, the cemetery, and all of these sites which had previously been mowed about every 4 to 6 weeks. So in year 2, obviously the pandemic hit us and it dramatically affected our staffing levels, and we were catapulted into a wider no-mow approach, but it was a really good opportunity for us to take perhaps a bolder decision and take it that little bit further. We had to adapt very quickly, and using the Local Places for Nature grant, it enabled us to buy the next step up in machinery, which for us was the Amazonian Profit Hopper, which you can see in the top left-hand corner of that photo there. We selected other locations to extend the no-mow approach and introduced incremental mowing regimes across some of our larger sites as well. So you can see on the bottom photo there, we've mowed the margins and left the middle section long, and then the top photo with the machine there as well. You can see we've left a shorter area for people to be able to kick a football around, have a picnic, and then we've got the longer grass area as well on the left-hand side. So this 3rd year of Local Places for Nature funding, we've taken a whole authority-wide approach and included a lot of our bigger and larger grassland sites. We've purchased bigger and better machinery. You can see top left picture, there's our new direct cut and collect tractor and trailer. And this has enabled us to introduce more cut and collect at the larger sites. So now we're in our 3rd year and all mowing ceases during May. Except for safety critical areas, sports pitches and some of our more formal locations. The regular mowing schedules are limited then to up to 6 cuts a year, or between every 4 to 6 weeks from June to October. So sites are surveyed before they're mowed, and this just helps us to identify a new species that may indicate a need for a further delayed cut. So we had, lots of orchids popping up in random places that perhaps we weren't expecting them. So it's just meant that we were able to manage those sites a little bit better. So yeah, now we do a mix of cut and collect and a mix of cut and drop, and it's done depending on the site really. We've developed some visual guides for each of our larger sites. You can see in the picture on the left-hand side there, and these are for our grounds maintenance teams. So we've got quite a large number of large sites in Newport. There's no two sites that are the same, so it's really hard to bring in like a consistent mowing regime across those sites. So each site has this visual guide that goes out with the tractor drivers, and it just indicates to them the type of cutting that they should be doing, where and when on that site. Some of the challenges that we faced during the last 3 years. So we found that when the going gets tough, the grass gets cut. This is in the early days especially. So as soon as complaints were made, there was a bit of a knee-jerk reaction, and the reaction was to send out the mowers. It took a lot of patience and perseverance to maintain our mowing alterations, but ensuring that people felt part of the process, educating staff and the public was key. Action, not words. So Newport is an accredited bee-friendly city. It was really important for us to put our money where our mouth was and make sure that the changes were embedded and not just a box-ticking exercise, by taking real action to help stop the decline in pollinating species in a climate and ecological emergency. Conservation versus controversial. So change is hard and not everyone's going to like it, and finding the balance, was key. We couldn't cut and collect everywhere, but equally we couldn't leave everything to grow. And engagement and use of campaigns really helped us to gain support. Biodiversity is everyone's responsibility. We all have a part to play as an organisation and individuals, and campaigns and engagement help to share that message. So linking with the bigger picture, the changes that we made now affect our future generations and the resilience of the ecosystems to withstand pressure such as as climate change. Cutting grass is not us being lazy. It's not a cost-cutting exercise, but it is an effective way to take action across a widespread area. So social media has been a great tool to use to capture how people really feel. And people are very quick to complain, and complaints mostly outweigh the compliments. So building relations with communities and help to encourage some more positive feedback and again reinforce that wider buy-in. Although we had a lot of inquiries and complaints in the second year, we actually recorded the highest number of compliments through our contact centre ever, and they did in the end up outweighing the complaints, which was quite nice at the time. I'm not sure the contact centre would agree with me though. This year, for example, we've only actually received 3 complaints by the contact centre, so it just goes to show that people are gradually accepting the changes now within the communities. The last couple of slides that I've got to show you are just examples of some of those larger cut and collect sites. So you can see the picture on the bottom left there. That's a site that's probably about 7.5 acres, and it was previously cut every 4 to 6 weeks, and then we stopped cutting, left it to grow, and you can see the change there in the picture on the top right hand side. And again, this one is an example of where it was another site that's previously cut every 4 to 6 weeks. We mow the margins, we mow a pathway through it, and you can see they're just doing a short transect in that location. I've got 10 different species of wildflowers in my hands, and that was the first year that we'd left that area to grow. And again, just another one of our larger sites to leave you with. So this site again is in the heart of Newport. It's in a really urban, low-income area, but it's a really good accessible space for people to access nature on their doorstep. Again, a site that would have been mowed usually every 4 to 6 weeks, but now has become one of our larger leaf to grow sites and is cut and collected at the end of the season. And I think that's it for all our slides. So yeah, thank you very much for listening and watching, and I'll hand you back to Richard.
Hi everyone, can you all see and hear me again? I'm hoping to be a bit more successful on my slideshow this time. Right. Thank you both. I think you can see there that it's having a programme in place over a number of years. You can see that sort of longitudinal improvements and the connectivity between other areas and other groups, and across the whole programme. And the idea of having all these different streams where there is an access point to all sorts of groups, right the way from little sheltered accommodation right the way through to local authorities and beyond. And I think having that connectivity and the LMPs being that thread throughout really is helping us make big grounds, and sort of on a political side of things as well, really picking up people's ears to what we're doing and how we're managing our landscapes and our small little urban spaces even better. What I just wanted to do before finishing off with some questions is to just to a little advert really for the It's For Them campaign. It's a campaign pulled together by Welsh Government to assist any organisation that is looking to do some of the work that you've just seen showcased by the 2 LMP coordinators there. It's a package of support to provide collateral, to provide different bits of information that people can draw from and take and put into their own communications, their own PR, their own products out in the field as well. So there's a lot of campaign materials there. There's logos and details. There's a whole toolkit of things that people can use, including the social media campaign sort of hashtags as well. So everything from sort of roadside verge graphics through to sort of smaller green spaces, and then right the way through to some of the areas that you just saw in the photographs just then, sort of grassland management or managed spaces as meadows, giving some information that you can signage up as your own and utilize in your own spaces. We've also got infographic templates that kind of demonstrate the rationale and reasons for leaving places to grow, and the sort of regimes that are in place and why and who they're for. And there's also a booklet that can be adapted or utilised as well to hand out various things. Included in that, there's been a short animation done and quite an extensive FAQs that you can link to, and all of that can be accessed by the web page that you can see there. I think the presentations will become available. We'll throw that web page out on the chat as well. So if anyone wants to utilise that, then please get in touch or use the materials. And Kathleen Carroll is leading that, and she thinks she's on the call here. So any questions that you might have for that as well, please, now's your chance. So I think we've covered everything off that we wanted to cover today. Apologies, first of all, for the presentation earlier. I just really couldn't see what I was looking at, but we're happy to take through Ant and myself any questions to any of the presenters in the last half an hour.
Thanks, Richard. That's fantastic. We've got about 3 or 4 minutes, so perhaps if Lucy and V can put the cameras and mics back on, we could take some questions. We've got one very technical question from Mark, as you'd expect, Mark Barber, here, which is exactly what make and model is your cut and collect machine, and are you happy with it? I think that's directed at Lucy.
Firstly, yeah, the team are ecstatic with it. I've been sent photos of them smiling with it in various places. So yeah, they're really happy with it. I'll have to look up the spec of the direct cut and collect trailer for you, but I know that the tractor is the John Deere 613 6.5 ton, 130 brake horsepower. If that helps, yeah. But I'm sure I'll be able to give you further updates the more the guys are using it. But yeah, so far so good.
So just tell me, when you trained as an ecologist, do you think that you'd be able to just quote off the top of your head the make and brake horsepower of a model of tractor?
Absolutely not.
There we go. I can't see any more questions directly in the chat at the moment. I've got a quick one for you, actually. I know that we had a really good presentation in the LMP community from Dr. Phil Sterling of the butterfly conservation on the actual relative costs of cut and collect versus the standard amenity mowing and such like. Have you been collecting any data as to whether this represents for the local authority a cost saving, cost neutral, or increased cost in changing mowing practices?
We haven't got any sort of set data to back this up. I think the initial assumption was that actually it would be a cost saving exercise, whereas actually it's not. It just lumps the cost later on into the year, basically. So it does look like you're making a cost saving year on year until you then get to sort of August, September, and it is a little bit more sort of staff intensive. So for us in Newport, we have a very small core regular grass cutting team, and then we employ seasonal staff throughout the year. So it's kind of trying to look at when and how we use those seasonal staff now to kind of help us maintain those sites, whereas obviously they would have been sort of used sort of right from the beginning of the year, sort of April onwards. It is actually giving us an opportunity to address other tasks that need doing, but then we're just finding that it can be quite intensive sort of in a short space of time throughout August and September. But to help with that, there are some sites that we'll start sort of reducing the amount of cut and collect then if you like. So from sort of the end of July, towards the end of July, myself and Ollie are out monitoring the sites quite regularly, and we'll start selecting sites that the team can get onto then and start sort of reducing those sites. So just to kind of spread it over, give us a couple more weeks to work with, and that has helped us a lot.
Brilliant, thanks. And one cheeky question then. So I know that some of the comments that have been floating about from maintenance teams is that they don't want to have to deal with all the complaints of the long grass and so on and so forth. And I know that I think Joel up in Denbighshire took the bold step of handing out cards to people on site, which basically directed complaints instead of to the maintenance teams towards the biodiversity staff instead. Is that the similar approach that you've taken?
That is the same approach that we took. So the first year, part of the working with the team to address some of the challenges was look guys, I'm here, I'll be your buffer, I'm here to support you, I will deal with the inquiries and the and any complaints or compliments that we get through. I think that really did come and kick me in the behind a little bit. I spent about 3 weeks and probably doing about 12 hours a day responding to random complaints and inquiries coming at me left, right and centre. It was very intense for a short period of time, but I think that rather than sending out a blanket response to people, it was an opportunity to engage with people, and so it did take a little bit longer perhaps, but I think that was really beneficial because, like I said, last year the number of complaints we were getting was really high. This year we had 3. So I think taking that time back then, just taking that pressure off the team so they could get on with the actual work, and then I was here to.
So key to persuading the maintenance team that it was worth doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, well, we're just slightly running over time now, so thanks ever so much. I'll thank Richard, V and Lucy again for that set presentations, and we'll be moving on then. So the next session is from Hilary Keogh of the Nature Friendly Farming Network. If you just joined, I'll just remind you that you can pop questions in the chat function here, and we'll try and pick those up first time at the end of the session. If you want details of the presenters or the speakers' biographies, then they're available on the main Hoover website. So just log in for the session for that. And after the session finished at some point later, the recording will be available on the WBP website. So do feel free to access it there if you need to. So without further ado, I'll hand over then to Hilary Keogh of the Nature Friendly Farming Network.
Hi everybody. So as Adam said, I'm Hilary. I'm chair of the Nature Friendly Farming Network and farming up in North Wales. I'm going to give you a personal view of practical sustainable farming that we do on my family home farm, with added experiences and comments from other Nature Friendly Farming Net members to demonstrate how nature friendly farm practices can help deliver multiple outcomes, from food security to tackling the nature and climate crises, improve public health and increased economic resilience. We hear a range of terms to describe aspects of today's farming, from regenerative agriculture to rewilding and holistic management. But nature-friendly farming can encompass several of these categories, working with appropriate livestock and encouraging nature to play a part in producing sustainable food as part of a farm business. Next slide, please. First, I want to introduce you to the Nature Friendly Farming Network. Rhwydwaith, Ffermio at Llees Natur. The Nature Friendly Farming Network is a farmer-led independent organisation which was established in January 2018. We're a group of farmers who have come together to champion a way of farming which is sustainable and good for nature. We come from a range of backgrounds, big and small, organic and conventional, and are passionate about ensuring our countryside is productive and bursting with wildlife. We're a UK-wide movement, a steering group in each country. Nature Friendly Farming Network Cumbria has 360 farmer members, as well as 635 public members who support our manifesto. We want to develop, use and demonstrate profitable, sustainable techniques that provide high quality food while supporting wildlife. It's free to join and it takes just 5 minutes online. Next slide, please. This is our farm, below the wood on the hilltop. Our grandchildren are the 7th generation born on the farm, so we're less owners, more like the current guardians of the land and the Welsh mountain sheep flock, which have their cynefin or their heft on the Cynaliadwy mountains behind us. The home farms, ours and our daughters just up the hill, are just 52 hectares or 130 acres, but we manage conservation grazing on a further 172 hectares throughout northwest Wales. Next slide. We keep a flock of 350 Welsh mountain sheep and a few Manx Lockton primitive sheep. The conservation grazing is done by 30 native breed cattle, including Highlands and Belted Galloways, and 30 semi-feral Cynaliadwy ponies, with the Manx sheep used for close shepherding in woodlands because of their willingness to flock together. The hill sheep are ideal for managing grasslands and lapwing nesting ground over the winter to keep the sward open and create conditions for the birds in the spring. The areas that are conservation grazed include a wide range of habitats, including semi-natural grassland, fen, sand dunes and salt marshes, with Ramsar, Special Area of Conservation and Site of Special Scientific Interest designations. Approximately 95% of the farm is managed for wildlife, with the farm produce as the secondary output and the species and habitats we're conserving being the main output. Next slide. We tried to make the most from our sales. Cattle improve the quality of their grazing as they mature, so they're at least 5 years old and up to 12 years old when sold. But they fetch a premium of double their value if they were sold on the hoof when marketed with a wildlife-friendly USP. And we have repeat customers appreciating their flavour and environmental credentials. We're looking for the sweet spot between nature and profitability. Next slide. The Manx wool is sold to spinners and weavers at a price that covers the cost of shearing and keeping the ewe. More than can be said of what is offered by the Wool Board. Last year, for 500 fleeces, we had a bill for a £5. The Manx ram lambs can be sold at a premium for barbecuing on an asado at around 18 months old, having spent the winter managing hay meadows and late summer on the salt marsh. Next slide. Our costs are minimal. We have a family countryside contracting business, so most of our hay is made on Woodland Trust conservation land, in woodland glades, and on the meadow areas we've created for the Trunk Roads Agency on the A55 between Bangor and Holyhead. We don't use fertiliser or sprays, and we worm according to dung analysis. With the low stocking levels and the range of plants available to the livestock, there's little need for medication, although we do have to dip the sheep after they return from the common grazing. The cattle are outwintered on a sandy nature reserve where they can be fed forage. Feeders are moved every time, so they create shallow hoof marks in brown ground, which the ground nesting birds appreciate. Next slide. Here are our sheep on their winter hangout on the shore between Llanfyfechan and Penrhyn Castle. They're hefted to the tides, learning to swim to safety if the tide comes in around them. We bring them home on the 1st of March so birds can nest. Just the ewes bearing twins are housed for a couple of weeks, so there's very little cost there. I'm not sure that we conform to the maximum sustainable output, MSO principles, which have been recently sort of understood, because theoretically we could produce more from the land that we farm, but we're aiming for maximum wildlife output, so we need some shaggy heathlands and grasslands. Next slide. We claim single farm payment on all the land, and that pays for the management, checking and transport and gives us a profitable business to support our family. We also have a network of local people around all the nature reserves that we help to look after, and they're really good at checking livestock for us too. And we use social media and WhatsApp for our stock checkers. We're pleased the new sustainable farming scheme looks as if we'll be able to maintain our income and continue to look after the habitats. Next slide. There's a wide range of farmers in the Nature Friendly Farming Network Wales, passionate about such a wide variety of important species and places they're trying to protect on their farms. This is Saoirse Lewis's farm. She's in the Ellen Valley, and she's the Nature Friendly Farming Network Vice Chair. She says, I aspire where it's practical and not at odds with existing biodiversity to get all our field boundaries to be something that benefits wildlife, whether it's a riparian corridor, a dry stone wall, a hedgerow, clouth or a ditch. Just imagine if every farm in Wales had a boundary like that. And if you think about it, that would be amazing. She's a great believer in natural regeneration for tree establishment, keeping the local tree genetics and allowing the woodland understory to develop and avoiding rows of bought-in trees. Saoirse's farm encompasses freeth, peatland, woodland, species-rich grassland and wax-cap fungi habitat. She feels it's important that traditional farming methods are held on to, with farmers learning firsthand how to look after the nature that looks after the farm. Saoirse says, supporting local markets and nature-friendly food production here in Wales is key to telling the story of the great things that can be done in the landscape of Wales. Next. One Carmarthenshire farmer, Howell Morgan, has changed from production-focused high-input farming to a lower-stocking, minimal-input system, realising the benefits of working with and enjoying nature. About 15% of the farm is woodland now, and approximately 1,000 metres of hedgerow have been restored every year in the last 5 years. He's stopped cutting all the hedges every year. The hedges look after the stock in the summer and the winter from the sun and the rain. There were insects on those leaves until late winter for the birds, If you haven't got that diversity of wildlife on your farm, you're doing something wrong. You're missing a trick, he says. Next. It's important to acknowledge the diversity of farms and farming styles. Another North Wales farmer has pasture that hasn't been ploughed since the Second World War. And as grazing pressure and fertiliser use have reduced, this is becoming more species diverse. Next. He sees his most valuable element for nature is the spring-sown cereal he grows for his livestock and overwintered stubble left for wildlife, particularly in a landscape dominated by pasture. He says that all year it's got more biodiversity than all the rest of the farm combined. In the growing crop, you get a lot of insects, butterflies, and then you get the arable weeds growing at the base of the crop. Then we harvest in September and don't touch it until March. You get the seed-eating birds moving in, the skylarks, tree sparrows, all different types of finches, he says. Sam Kenyon near St Asaph has transformed her farm from intensive maize production to sheep, cattle, fruit and vegetables, goats and chickens, with herbal lays, hedges and trees established to maximise biodiversity and stabilise the soils. She's creating a water meadow and a wet woodland to slow the flow of the river, reducing flooding on her farm and protecting the town further downstream. Next. With the nature and climate crises deepening, everyone must act to rectify the situation. And these case studies have shown that there are things that every farmer can do to improve their farms for nature and help to halt or reverse the decline in wildlife while improving farm resilience and profitability at the same time. Next slide. Next. Habitat restoration on a landscape scale, such as peatland or catchment restoration work, isn't regenerative from a farm perspective, but it is resilience building and repairing loss to the environment. It's investment in the landscape to make a difference, based around the wider community, reducing fire hazards and combating risks to the climate. So we need support to devise initiatives that encompass groups of farms and communities and a wider landscape. In the Sustainable Farming Scheme outline proposals, Welsh Government is saying that they'll maintain the direction of travel. Ultimately, the scheme must facilitate sustainable food production, reward farmers who are delivering public goods, and help them to transition to more nature-friendly farming systems. Next. We've seen the public backlash to the rumours of DEFRA pulling the plug on the English scheme, ELMS. The Welsh public won't stand for scaling back on ambition, we don't think, so we need to stick to our guns. Next. After all, long-term food production is dependent on a stable climate and healthy functioning ecosystems. 80% of Wales is farmed, so government, NGOs and farmers must get to grips with these issues. It's great to hear that under the new scheme, at least 10% of all farmland should be well managed for nature. With the right support and advice in place, there's no reason why every farm in Wales can't achieve this. It has the potential to make a real change for biodiversity across Wales. Next. DECA, diversity, extent, connectivity, condition and adaptability, is the objective of the Agri-Bill, outlining the steps needed to enhance ecosystems and create resilience. Next. Simply having 10% of semi-natural habitat alone will not be enough to achieve this. This habitat needs to be spread out and connected across the whole farm and managed well. We can't push nature into a corner. We need to view farms in their entirety and adopt a whole farm approach in any new scheme. All habitats are important. We need diversity on our farms, niches for all types of wildlife, from swallows to hedgehogs, to mycorrhizal bacteria and the amazing web of interconnected organisms under a healthy soil that we're only just beginning to understand. Who knew that cow saliva interacts with the soil microorganisms and plays an important part in cow biology? Hedgerows are a great connecting link. Well-managed hedgerows, not too tidy and with a variety of plant species. They allow owls and other predators, small mammals and insects to move across the landscape and give cows an enjoyable browse. Next. The woodland story is often forgotten. This is a crucial habitat providing nesting opportunities, forage, shelter and fixing carbon. Establishment of a diverse woodland understory should be included as a requirement in all new tree planting. Next. Regarding the requirement for 10% of farms' land to be tree cover, we understand that this is still under review as it isn't a realistic ambition for farms on the coastline or rocky headlands. And we mustn't plant trees for the sake of planting trees. We need the right tree in the right place. We also need to remember that well-managed species-rich grassland will fix more carbon than a woodland, and it won't release it. Next. The nature-friendly farming network seems now to be ahead of the curve. More and more farmers are realising that we can use nature's capital as an opportunity, secure our environment and enhance Wales's landscape. We're looking forward to engaging with the Welsh Government and other stakeholders in Wales on this vitally important scheme and taking nature-friendly farming for everyone into the future. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you.
Thank you, Hilary. Fascinating stuff there. We've got plenty of time for questions, which is always good. So we've got one, first of all, from Geraldine Ferguson, asking how widely accepted are the MSO principles across the general farming community?
MSO. Yes.
Could you put...
Maximum sustainable output.
Yeah.
So they are gaining traction. Yeah, there is more and more acceptance. I've got local people having a look at us and sort of having explanations of it and realizing that if you can use the grass that you're given and the sunshine that you're given and not have too many inputs, you can save money on your inputs and you can achieve your maximum sustainable output. What's quite hard for people to understand is, well, in fact, I was having a really good talk with the Farmers Union of Wales president a couple of weeks ago. And he said that they used to have like the best Charolais in the market and get lots and lots of money when they sold them. But the cost of producing those Charolais in caesarean sections and misbreeding and having to feed a large animal on an upland farm far outweighed really the income that they got from having the highest value cow. So he swapped to a different breed. What did he go to? Stabilizers or some kind of a smaller, lighter breed that's much, much better at utilizing natural forage. And his profits went up, and it's very hard to make a profit on any sort of cow system, but he was actually finding he was making money. He didn't have the hassle of vets coming out. He had happier cattle. And if you can persuade, if the president of the Farmers Union of Wales can start to move that way, then that is a really good thing, because he's going to take people with him.
Fantastic. Hilary, perhaps if you can pop your camera on so that people can see you as you're answering, that would be great. If your broadband will take it, that is. That's interesting stuff. There you are. I can see you now. That's really interesting stuff. I mean, there was a report recently, I think, wasn't there? Was the RSPB more is less about destocking upland hill farms actually resulting in higher profitability? Have you seen that one?
Yes. Yes. There are various nature-friendly farming network reports, which if you have a look on the website, there's a host of them. There's Rethink Farming, a practical guide for farming, nature and climate. Nature means business, establishing the balance between food production and improving nature, and the Rethink Food report, the need for change. And Farming for Our Future, nature-friendly climate change solution we urgently need. Farming for Climate Action, what are we waiting for? And a practical guide to climate action for UK farmers. And those are all available on the website.
Fantastic. So there's lots and lots of information out there. That's brilliant.
Lots of resources.
Yeah, at some point when you've got a second, if you could pop the link to that website in the chat so that everybody's got it to hand, that would be really useful, you know.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's another question here now from Alison Maha. Do you know of any farms that have given over some of their land to local schools or communities to utilise or maintain, and can be used as an educational tool and a well-being tool as well?
I don't know anyone that's given over land, but there are quite a few people who will take school trips and you know, let kids come and take part in doing something, whether it's hedge planting or digging vegetables or just looking at cows.
Yes, the land, of course, is the lifeblood of a farm and a farming family, isn't it? So it's sort of difficult to try and get them to part with it if you can. I've actually got an example in Pembrokeshire of somebody who is giving over parts of their farm to nature conservation activities, and then after they've departed this world, they're going to put that into a trust, a charitable trust for conservation. So people do it, but I think it's probably fairly rare, to be honest with you. Do you have any figures at all? You know, you touched upon that you can command a higher price for conservation grade produce, for example, conservation grade lamb or wool or whatever it might be. Obviously, that comes at the cost of some production. So do you have a kind of idea or a sense that you can give us of where the balance lies in terms of profitability?
I have had figures. I haven't got them exactly to hand, but if I take a slightly scruffy looking Highland or Belted Galloway to our local market, I might get £800 for or him. If I sell it on the hook, well, if I sell it just through word of mouth, really, quite often through our stock checkers and from people walking the wildlife sites that we look after, I can get up to £2,000. So it's a big difference. And the cost of producing that is probably £300. So it's quite a difference.
So it sounds like there's also a bit of a link to the kind of shortening supply chains and local markets agenda as well. Yes,
that's right. You know, it's interesting. One of the sites we look after is a fungi reserve right in the middle of Bangor. It's got a school on three sides, on each of three sides, and a housing estate on each of three sides. And it's just 13 acres of somewhere for people to empty their dogs quite often, but they're not too bad. A lot of people pick up. And once when I brought the cattle home for TB testing, I got stopped by the police on the way home because someone had reported me as stealing my cattle, which I was really pleased about. And so we advertised the beef for sale from there just by word of mouth. And people either go, oh, I couldn't possibly eat the Rufus or whoever he was because I've seen him every day. And the other lot go, well, I know exactly what he's been eating and I know he's been really happy and he's 5 years old. So yes, I'll have a box or a joint or whatever. And I think it makes people think differently about the whole cycle of beef production when they walk it and they see it and then they eat it.
Yeah. Do feel free to continue to put your questions in the chat if you'd like to. I mean, along a similar vein, you alluded to a reduction in use of medicines and pesticides, you know, where cattle are browsing on more diverse swards or sheep or whatever. I mean, do you have a feel for numbers on that?
I used to worm the lambs routinely about every 6 weeks. And now quite often I've done them maybe twice before sale. The cattle, the adult cattle don't get wormed. They get fluke drenched with the right fluke drench because of the dung testing to see whether we've got rumen fluke or liver fluke or both. And yeah, we do vaccinating. We're vaccinating against foot rot, so that saves a lot of drugs of injecting them against foot rot, which, I don't know, the foot rot vaccine costs £1 and it costs about £1 every time you give penicillin to a sheep with foot rot. So that's probably saving £2 a year per sheep. And that adds up when you've got 300 odd sheep. You know, that is saving some money, and it's much nicer for them not hobbling about, and nicer for me not spending my Saturday trimming sheep feet.
And also the environmental impact as well, obviously, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, it's all very positive, isn't it? You've got another question here in the chat from Geraldine. Do you get any problems at all with disease coming from dogs interacting with cattle when you graze them on areas that are open to the public?
We only put steers out on Ethinog on the fungi reserve because I don't want neosporosis, which is a problem when you've got heavily dog infested pastures. I haven't had any trouble with any other worms or anything on the cattle out there. I think it's sort of pick your horses for courses, really. But grazing 5 miles of coastline from Llanfairfechan, there's a lot of people walk their dogs there. And I haven't found any disease in the sheep as a result of them. We used to get a bit of worrying going on, but now I'm on social media, that has really calmed down. It's really interesting to use the social media and go, hey, the sheep are out and they're looking after the wildflowers, so take care of them. And people do, and people now have my number and they phone me up if there is an issue, and they'll wade in and get a sheep that gets chased into the lake or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, another thing as well that's related that somebody told me about this research. I have to confess I haven't read it myself. Looking though at herds where, especially where there's more of an age structure, so you've got some older kind of matriarchs in the herd as well that can teach the younger ones. So not such intensive production basically. They fitted GPS collars to stock, and they could really see how the older ones were showing the younger ones somehow, you know, which patches of ground they can go to for which kind of nutrient, or for self-medicating, or spending time in shade when it's sunny and such like. I mean, do you anecdotally even see that happening?
Yes, we completely see that happening, and that is another reason why we keep. I think my oldest cow is about 14, and she just knows all the sites. And you go to a site to load her up, and she walks in the trailer, and she says to the others, "Come on in, we'll be going somewhere tasty," and she just knows her way around. Yes, they all follow her. And so that's the reason for keeping even the steers until they're at least 5, because then I'll put a couple of younger ones in every year as I sell an older one out, and they just learn. They lead to wider diversity of plants if they're there with an older animal.
Fantastic. Just refreshing my chat here, see if we've got any more questions. So yes, from Kathleen Carroll at Welsh Government. Have you got any problems with people taking dogs for walks where the cattle are? I mean, basically, you know, unsavoury interactions between dogs and cattle.
We at the entrance to the site, we have a map, and it shows where the cattle are, and we're lucky with the site that it's possible to go for a walk from different entrances and avoid cattle. But most people don't. Most people just go through them. You do have to be a bit careful. I had one 6 foot tall crossbred animal who had been bucket reared, and he took a fancy to people and trotted after them for a fuss. And of course, they didn't see that as attractive. So sometimes you do have to move an animal off a site. It's sort of bringing them up well, so they're not so friendly that they'll chase people, but they're friendly enough that they don't mind people walking past. And again, it's having some older ones on site who will just chill out, and then they'll encourage the younger ones to chill out. I think if you put like a load of 12-month-old Frisian bullocks on the site, there'd be ructions.
So a question from Matt Brown. I mean, he's fascinated by your comment about cattle saliva interacting with microbes in the soil. Could you expand on that a little bit? We've only got a few minutes though.
Not enormously, no. It's something that I saw on a webinar or something, and just there are chemicals in the cattle saliva that are necessary for some functions of soil biology, and that is a great thing to sort of say to George Monbiot, isn't it? We can all eat plastic beef, but actually the grasslands and the habitats need the cattle, and so many insects and stuff that need the dung, and the birds that feed on the insects. It is a massive cycle that you're missing out if you just lab producing all your meat.
I mean, you know, you're a wonderful proponent of nature-friendly farming, and some of the people that you introduce us to in your talk, they're obviously very, very on board with the agenda. You know, on the other side of the coin, there are those farmers who are, you know, all about you know, production of cheap food to feed society and intensification, and that's another point of view. What would be the one thing that you would say to a truly intensive farmer to try and set him or her on the path to nature-friendly farming?
Well, I think there are little steps that you can do that are profitable, that are good for nature, and shouldn't affect their overall income. So just letting the hedges grow upwards, even if they want to trim them from going outwards, just let them go upwards, even if it's incrementally. Maybe just leaving an extra tractor width margin when they're ploughing, when they're putting crops in. Herbal lays will give you 20% extra production, and rotationally grazing them will allow opportunities for pollinators and mammals and hunting birds and all sorts. So that all those things really have almost zero cost and actually will improve the bottom line. And I have found that showing farmers those things, that can then give them an interest, and they'll spread and maybe dig a pond or something.
I think everybody on this call needs to talk to you a little bit more, actually, including myself. I've got a few people that I need to go and talk to, and could probably do with your advice about that. So it just remains me to say thank you very much, Hilary, for a really fascinating talk there. And we'll move on now to the next one, So we'll be talking about the Sustainable Farming Scheme, but let me just remind you, if you've only just joined us here, that questions can be asked in the chat function here. Your camera and microphone are muted, so just pop them in the chat and we'll try and get round to them if there's time at the end of the talk. If you'd like to see more details of the presentations or the biographies of the speakers, then those are available on the main Hoover page. So if you just register for the sessions, they'll be available for you. And shortly after the sessions conclude, the recordings will be available on the main WBP website. So please do feel free to access them there if you'd like to look back at the highlights. So in that case, we'll now move on, almost bang on time, to Gareth Davis, no, not Gareth Davis, sorry, Jessica Behrman and Gareth Davis, who are going to talk to us about the Sustainable Farming Scheme. Jessica, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Anthony. Just checking that everybody can hear me okay.
Yeah, we got you.
Great. Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks a lot for the invitation to come and talk to you about the Sustainable Farming Scheme. Yeah, I'm joined by my colleague Gareth, who would be far better placed probably to do this presentation and answer all your comments about biodiversity, because he's our habitat lead here in land management reform at Welsh Government. But I will talk you through the outline publication, which we published in July of this year. And give you a sort of indication of what our proposals are for our sustainable farming scheme, which is the replacement to future agricultural funding in Wales. But then I will leave Gareth to answer some more questions that I no doubt you'll have around sort of habitat management proposals and our actions that we're asking farmers to do to sort of support ecosystem resilience and things. So I'll just pull up the presentation now. And hopefully you can see that fine.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, great. So like I say, we published our outline proposals in July of this year. So these are this is for the Sustainable Farming Scheme, which is planned to be launched in 2025. The main purpose of the publication was to try to bring to life what we've talked about when we refer to sustainable land management. So this is our framework for future agricultural support in Wales. But it also provided the information on the scheme that farmers and other land managers and no doubt other stakeholders and people in Wales were looking for around kind of what that structure of that scheme would look like and what actions we're asking a farmer to do and the process that they'll have to undertake. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that shortly and sort of run through some of those to give you some of that understanding in case you hadn't managed to read the publication as yet. But it was also to demonstrate to the Senedd how we plan to use the powers of support which were set out in the Agriculture Bill. So it was to give that detail to show this is what we mean by these purposes of support that we wish ministers to have the powers to offer and be able to sort of fund as a result of. But like I say, these are very much proposals. So it was a basis for us to undertake our second stage of co-design, which is currently out and live, and I will provide the details for at the end of the presentation, because it's very much a sort of ask from us here in Welsh Government that we get as many farmers signed up to that co-design process and are completing the survey and giving us that much needed feedback on the proposals so that we can make sure that they're kind of right for Wales and right for our farmers, as well as delivering against the objectives and the aims of the scheme. So if I just touch on those, and it's really important for us to say here that sustainable land management is very much about simultaneously delivering a number of objectives. So sort of not looking at things in isolation, but making sure that that sort of sustainable production of food stays very much at the heart of our farming in Wales and our proposals, but also recognising that we very much need to respond to the climate emergency and reverse the decline in biodiversity. So those sort of two really kind of crucial issues that are actually affecting our ability to sustainably produce food in the future. Alongside which, and at the same time, we want to make sure that we're protecting the countryside and our cultural resources, so making sure that people have access to that countryside. We're going to be through the scheme and the actions we're asking farmers to undertake and the sort of support that we're going to be giving, it's very much a sort of land sharing approach to this. So making sure we take a nature and climate friendly approach to farming. And you'll see as we talk about some of those actions, that some of the many of the actions we've chosen actually deliver multiple benefits in those areas. So while they may be designed predominantly to focus on one thing, they actually deliver against a number of the both objectives and what we're referring to as our sustainable land management outcomes. So these are things we're trying to achieve, or we're designing the scheme to try and achieve. And I won't read them all out to you, but no doubt you'll be looking down to quickly count number 9 around resilient ecosystems. But obviously it goes without saying that some of the actions that we're looking to do are sort of around, I suppose, reducing ammonia emissions and things are going to address both clean air and clean water at the same time as supporting resilient ecosystems. So it's not that things are done in isolation. So the way that we've sort of designed it is to create that holistic scheme. We're asking farmers to do a number of actions, and each of those has multiple benefits and addresses a number of the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. We've always, and we've set this out sort of in previous consultations, so this has not been our first publication around future farming and agricultural support in Wales. So from Brexit in our land and sustainable farming in our land, then through the sort of white paper where we made those outline proposals around what the agriculture bill was going to look like. We very much had at the forefront of our mind some design principles. So that has been that we want to keep farmers on the land, so we very much want to support the sort of thriving rural communities that we've got in Wales. As I mentioned, food production and sustainable food production is vital for our nation, and we want to sort of continue to support that alongside obviously addressing the sort of climate and nature emergencies. We want to help build a prosperous and resilient agricultural industry, and you'll see when I talk about in a minute our sort of characteristics that we want of farmers in the future, and that's very much to be resilient and productive, making sure that sort of the economic focus of the farmers is also at the forefront of our minds. We talk about the fact that we want to maximise all of those sustainable land management outcomes. So it's not about looking at something in its silo. It's about trying to set up a structure and processes in place that help to deliver against a number of or deliver sort of multiple benefits by tackling certain areas. And that all farmers should be able to access the scheme. So we very much see this as a replacement of the basic payment that they're getting now under the cap, and we want to make sure that as many farmers as possible can access the scheme in the same way going forward. So you'll see when we touch a little bit on eligibility and things later that we're trying to support the active farmer here, the one that's actually sort of managing the land and performing the actions, and that they all should be able to access the scheme. A little bit about what the scheme structure looks like. So we are building on national minimum standards. So we've talked about our approach to developing and introducing national minimum standards in the white paper, and work still progressing there. But this is about going above that baseline legislation. It's about rewarding farmers who go on and do more and sort of have better practice. So the sustainable farming scheme is in 3 layers. The universal layer is a sort of bundle of actions that we're expecting all farmers to perform. So some of them that won't be appropriate for certain reasons. For instance, our proposals around animal welfare obviously won't be applicable if you don't have animals, but generally these are actions which are applicable to the majority of farm types and the majority of farm sizes in Wales. So we've sort of pulled together a proposal of what that universal bundle will look like, and we outline those in the publication, and we can talk a little bit more about some examples of those shortly. But that kind of universal layer for which farmers will receive a baseline payment for performing those actions across their farm. So it's very much a sort of holistic whole farm approach. And then there'll be a range of optional actions. So these may be more complex actions or sort of more tailored or bespoke actions. So maybe they're kind of only relevant for farms that have certain features or certain farm type, certain land types on their farms. So that's why we've sort of referred to them as optional, because they wouldn't be appropriate for all farmers to undertake them. And these may be funded in a slightly different way. So they might be sort of more suitable to capital grants, or there may be more bespoke or tailored advice suited to those optional actions. But again, those farmers wishing to go on and do more, or are sort of already performing at a higher level, would be able to take up these optional actions. And then finally, last but certainly not least, we've got the collaborative layer. So that's about bringing farmers together. So that could be farmers in the scheme and those, for whatever reason, who don't or can't join the scheme, but also with other land managers and other stakeholders and other actors really in the supply chain. So it could be collaborative projects to connect habitats, or bring sort of different land managers together to address a certain catchment area, but it could be something quite different. It could be around sort of supply chain opportunities and supporting different sort of parts of the supply chain to come together and fulfill a different supply chain opportunity. So a range of different sort of collaborative projects there, and obviously that will need sort of different facilitation support and a range of different support mechanisms and funding mechanisms really to try and help that. And we're very much still developing the proposals in a lot of these areas, and like I say, that's why we're undertaking the co-design to try and understand whether we've pitched that range of universal actions appropriately, and whether the kind of maybe some of those optional or collaborative are ready to sort of be launched sooner, or need a little bit more work. Just quickly, like I say, we sort of felt like we wanted a bit of a vision for the scheme and farms in Wales of the future, and that's why we sort of came up with these 5 characteristics where we felt like all farmers would work towards, and that's being resilient and productive. They would have low farm emissions and try to maximise their carbon sequestration. We wanted them to reduce, reuse and recycle inputs, nutrients and waste. And this is very much focused on as well sort of supporting that economic resilience of farmers, because what we're sort of tending to find and hear is that a lot of these sort of actions that we're proposing, or that we've worked with farmers to come up with, actually help to improve their bottom line as well, particularly in sort of the current situations we're faced with around buying in external inputs. So that seemed like a sort of really strong characteristic that we wanted to promote. Obviously, keen to ensure that we focus on protecting and enhancing the farm ecosystem, and that most of all it benefits the people, so the people on the farms and the people of Wales, animals and our place, so our sort of cultural heritage and identity. So again, quite broad and holistic in the approach, but sort of all things that we felt like we could work together with farmers to achieve. I touched on the fact that we had this sort of bundle of universal actions, and this is not all of them, but it's to give you sort of an idea, if you haven't managed to read the publication, of the sorts of things we're looking at in this sort of universal layer. So we're wanting to support sort of the business management of the farm. So we're asking farms to measure and monitor sort of a range of data and benchmark that data against key KPIs to try and understand how the farm is performing and to try and optimize that performance. So there'll be a range of sort of support available to be signposted to help farmers seek new opportunities, or make sure that they're kind of maximizing the opportunities that are available through the sustainable farming scheme. So important they have that kind of baseline to understand how they're doing. We want farmers to make the best use of fertilizer. So as I mentioned about sort of reducing inputs and the external inputs that farmers are using. So appropriate nutrient management planning, and this is going to be based on soil testing. So we're asking all farmers to carry out chemical, biological and physical assessment of their soils as part of this universal action. We want to support them to improve animal efficiency, so undertaking an animal health improvement cycle, working closely with their vet to identify where improvements could be made and carrying out the actions accordingly. If you haven't heard already, we've also asked farms to have at least 10% tree cover. So this was probably the more sort of publicised and the action that we're getting quite a lot of feedback and requests for clarity on. But this is sort of managing their current woodland on their farm, which counts towards the 10%, but also if they haven't got that 10% tree cover, asking them to create new woodland or introduce more trees through an agroforestry approach on their farm. And all of those trees, so the current tree cover and also and any new creations will need to be managed in line with the UK forestry standard, because we know about, there's so many benefits for better managing trees that can come about as a result, not just sort of creating new woodland. And hopefully you'll be pleased to hear, but also would welcome feedback on the fact that we've also asked farmers to have at least 10% of their land to be managed with practices that benefit nature. So a range of different habitat management actions that farmers will undertake to achieve this and do this. But if, again, they don't have that 10% cover or 10% amount of their farm addressed to this, then it will be about creating new habitat in order to achieve that. Like I say, these are just example universal actions, and we have a range of other actions in the optional layer around sort of restoring peatland, actions to reduce ammonia emissions, universal actions around introducing cover cropping and multi-species lays, all of which have benefits to sort of ecosystem resilience and biodiversity, even if sort of that's not their sort of main focus. So it's important to remember, like I say, that they're very much a kind of holistic scheme which hopes to deliver against multiple benefits. Just to touch briefly on this, because I'm conscious of time and I want to allow some questions. We have outlined in the publication the process that farmers will undertake. Probably what's most important to flag to you here is that we've said that farmers will need a sustainability review on entry to the SFS, and that will include a habitat baseline review, so a review of their current sort of habitat on their land, the quality of that habitat and the condition that it's in order to help inform sort of appropriate actions to choose and to go on to sort of reward the farmer for any maintenance and improvements that they make as a result of the scheme. So I think that's quite a crucial point to note. But like I say, I won't sort of touch too much on the full process given the time, but we talk through that and we sort of do a farmer walkthrough as part of the publication, so it's something to refer to. As I mentioned, the scheme is due to launch in 25, but we don't want to waste a period between now and then to sort of not support farmers who are potentially already undertaking these sustainable land management actions or are wishing to do so in order to best sort of prepare them for entry into the SFS. So we're wanting to run a number of projects to make sure that farmers are in the best position to undertake all of those universal actions by the time the scheme is launched, and to obviously maximise the financial opportunities it presents. So whether that's around diversification or maybe ensuring that they are already at that 10% tree cover and 10% habitat, so that they can limit the amount of work they'll need to do post 25. It also allows us to kind of pilot and test some of the elements of the scheme, so things like the habitat baseline review, some sort of piloting exercise to make sure that we've sort of pitched that right, we have the relevant expertise, and that it's something that can be rolled out across potentially the 16,000 farms or more that want to come into the scheme. But all of these sort of projects will continue to deliver the outcomes that say previous sort of RDP projects have aimed to do, and that those sustainable land management outcomes that I mentioned at the start that we want to sort of continue to deliver against. Then post 25, we're proposing a transition phase. So this is to try and sort of support farmers, both sort of economically and you know, in the round, I guess, just provide them with that stability through the change in funding from BPS through the sustainable farming scheme. So making sure that there's no cliff edge in funding, making sure that they, like I say, they maximise the opportunities of the SFS. We want to incentivise and encourage as many farms to take up the SFS and start sort of delivering those outcomes and actions early enough. So we'll be looking at how we sort of incentivise that approach through that transition phase. And finally, I suppose a little bit of a plea from us. We'd very much welcome involvement and engagement in our co-design. So this is both from farmers and from stakeholders. So the online survey, which you can find, and I know the presentations will be shared, so through our Sustainable Farming Scheme link, enables farmers to sign up and answer that survey and give feedback on the proposals that we've made, but it also enables stakeholders. We've got a stakeholder feedback form as well to provide that feedback and make sure that, you know, any amendments and refinements to the scheme can be fully addressed in time for launch in 25. So thank you very much, and like I say, welcome questions. Sorry, I've gone over a little bit, but yeah, I will be sure to probably hand a few of them to Gareth to make sure that they're answered as expertly as they can be. But thank you very much.
Thank you. That's brilliant. And yes, the chat function is buzzing at the moment, so we've got some questions for you. Lovely. We'll start off with one that's actually just cheekily from me, and it's about the 10% tree cover, which I'm sure you could have probably foreseen as well. I've heard a lot of people suggesting that the 10% tree cover is likely to go on the unproductive bits of the farm, which are already where the remaining biodiversity is. So what's going to be done to make sure that the 10% tree cover is on less biodiverse areas and we don't end up taking up the remaining biodiversity with tree planting?
Gareth, do you want to take this? Yeah, amazing. Thank you.
Okay, well, there's clearly two approaches to woodland planting. You can either plant in blocks, woodland blocks, or you can approach it through hedges, what we call hedges and edges, or agroforestry. So those are the two approaches. Clearly, by planting blocks of woodland, you're taking larger chunks out of production. By the hedges and edges approach, it's more of a land sharing than sparing. So should allow for a greater design on the farm to incorporate the right trees in the right places, but also aid production. As far as ensuring that we don't plant trees where we would want to preserve things, well, one of the aspects of that is to ensure that there's constraints on where woodland is planted. And one of those constraints will include priority habitats and good habitats that could become, through management and maintenance and enhancement, priority habitats.
Fantastic. That's the answer we were all hoping for, I think. That's lovely. So we'll go to the chat then, and we've got where are we now? First one's from Daryl Cox, who represents an NGO working with farmers, interested to get involved with the co-design, working on completing the consultation. But just wondering, you know, once that's been completed, what will the process be? Is there any further opportunity to be involved? For example, they're working with English equivalents through DEFRA at the moment.
Yeah, thanks, and really glad to hear that we've got that sort of keenness to be involved. We very much welcome that. Yeah, so this is a sort of our outline proposals. We will undertake co-design. We will make those sort of further refinements to the scheme, and it's an ongoing sort of iterative process. And then we will consult again on the final scheme. So no decisions will be made until we've both sort of published that scheme and also the economic analysis that will run alongside it. So that's where we present the findings of what our modelling has showed us on the impact of our proposals, or the modelled impact of our proposals. So there will be further opportunities to respond to future consultations as well around the scheme.
That's great. I'm just going to pop to the bottom of the chat because there's a question which relates to the last question about tree planting down there from Alison Heal, who's the ecologist in Ceredigion. And she's wondering about encouraging natural regeneration rather than focusing on tree planting, especially where we haven't got a proper local provenance supply stream for new trees. So will natural regeneration count for you?
The short answer is yes. We want to obviously encourage as much tree planting and tree cover in Wales as appropriate. Clearly, natural regeneration is a cost-effective way of allowing that to happen. Managing land in a way that through management actions that allows natural regeneration will obviously be the key. And building that into a structure where we pay for management actions, given, of course, the fact that we have to work out costs in order to make payments, will be a crucial element.
That brings us on, in fact, to a question from Julian Hughes. In fact, at what point in the design will the financial incentives for each of the three elements be agreed? Not the actual amount of money, but the relative amounts, because the willingness to take up options will basically succeed or fail on the perceived return against the effort.
Yeah, so in our future consultation, we'll also present proposed payment rates. So whilst you're saying, you know, it's not the amount that the farmer will receive, I'm sure farmers will be very keen to see that kind of payment, those payment rates. It's definitely something that we were, that was unfortunate, I suppose, that we couldn't publish alongside, that we didn't have the detail on to publish alongside the publication. But alongside that, there will be that sort of economic analysis where we'll look at sort of the costs of relevant sort of groups of actions, and also think about proposed budgets for both the universal layer, for the optional layer, and for that collaborative action, so that we've got some greater sort of indication as to where the sort of money is being spent.
We've got questions coming in thick and fast now, so we'll try and get through as many as we can. If we don't get to your question, then perhaps the speakers could pop their email addresses into the chat or just make themselves available for answering other questions, take it away from the recordings afterwards. But we'll try and get through them now anyway. So a question then from Geraldine Ferguson. You mentioned about advising farmers on optimising performance using a KPI. Do you use the principles of maximum sustainable output as lined by Nothing Associates, and there's a website link there? So basically, what will your KPIs be? How will they be measured?
Yeah, so again, we're still working on the detail of what those key performance indicators are, and it's more likely to be something that will feature in our consultation next year to sort of make sure that we've got that right. The workshops that we're holding as part of co-design, one of those particularly will focus on this sort of benchmarking and managing and optimizing farm performance, and that's where we'll drill a little bit deeper with those farmers present on those potential key performance indicators to make sure that we've sort of got that best, I suppose, best indication of that's what we're looking for from farmers. So, you know, weighting that feedback really.
We'll hop around a bit and come back to the 10% tree cover and habitat land again. That seems to be a hot topic at the moment in this forum. That's no surprise, I don't suppose. From Deb Hill, she's asking about the 10% habitat target. Can it include woodland and hedgerows in addition to the 10% tree cover? So you'd end up, I guess, with 20% tree cover.
So what we've, and feel free to come in, Gareth, but we've proposed that trees in hedges will count towards the 10% tree covers, but hedgerows themselves are not part of that 10% tree cover.
Okay. So the habitat land, the land that benefits nature, is an additional 10% to the 10% tree cover land. Yeah.
Depending on some types of land. So if you look at sort of well-managed broadleaf woodland, that would count towards both the 10% tree cover and the 10% habitat. But just a sort of a hedgerow would only be towards a sort of well-managed hedgerow would be towards the habitat. 10% tree cover, but 10% cover, but not the 10% tree cover.
And obviously, you mentioned at the beginning there about making sure that farmers meet a certain regulatory floor before accessing the scheme. What's the process there? Who's assessing that?
So the law is the law, and that will continue to be regulated in the same way. So our proposals around national minimum standards that we outlined in the white paper. The expectation is obviously all farmers as part of the scheme will be compliant with the law, as we expect of all farmers. This is about those farmers that are wanting to go on and do more, and we will reward and fund them and to go on and do more.
Fantastic. So let's have a scroll through some of these here. David Smith is saying that what's the expected delivery framework for the scheme? Will you use project officers or similar to enable target best value for biodiversity and protected sites, etc.? Could external organisations be involved or contracted to identify and support landscape scale working for species objectives, for example?
Yeah, all really good questions and really good proposals, to be honest. Still something we're working through as we develop the proposals. So I think we've always sort of taken the approach, the first thing we need to do is outline almost what we want farmers to do. So what does the evidence say would bring about the most amount of the outcomes, and sort of that's what we've put into the scheme structure. Then it's about that wider support network. So how do we make sure that farmers have the access to the expertise that they'll need in order to perform those actions, and how do we make sure that we sort of design a future Farming Connect service to provide knowledge, skills and knowledge transfer opportunities so that farmers can best learn from each other about these types of practices, but also that they can access the technical guidance and support that they'll require to undertake them.
Thanks, that's brilliant. The questions are still coming in thick and fast, but unfortunately we are out of time. So I will just thank you for a really fascinating presentation and for being here today. If perhaps you can pick up the remaining questions that are in the chat there and maybe get back to people, or if you wish to, then put your email address in the chat here and people can contact you direct if that's something you want to do. So it just remains for me really to thank all of the various. Jess, sorry, did you have something you want to say?
I was literally just going to mention that on that sort of that link to the co-design. So if you look at the publication, there's an opportunity to send all those sorts of questions through to us direct through the Welsh Government website. So that's probably the best approach to make sure that we pick all of those up.
Fantastic. So perhaps the conference organisers can make sure those get captured and posted on through. That's brilliant. Lovely, thanks. So just then to thank Jess and Gareth, and in fact all our speakers today, Louise and Richard, V, Lucy and Hilary as well, for coming today and making it such a fascinating session. Thank you all for attending. It wouldn't be anything without you guys. And that unfortunately is the end of our session for today. So thank you very much.